Good evening, everyone. Good evening, folks. It is September 28th, 2024. The time now is 9:09 p.m. Eastern Time. It is Saturday night. I'm surprised you guys are watching. Most people would be out drinking or something. So we left it off yesterday where? We were talking about spyware. The human spyware. Not even a little bit of music on while I'm talking. Can you guys hear me? Peace out, peace out. So we're going to be talking about in this section, it's going to be in reference to, it's really about the Matrix and how the simulation is recording. It's recording everything you do, everything you experience. It's kind of trippy though, if you really think about it. I was just thinking about the NDEs. That would be the near-death experiencers. And their experience once their body dies. They talk about, going to the heavens or wherever they're going, to those other realms. And they state that they can see their life on a screen from birth to the day that they died. And I was just like, I was thinking about this for a while, and I'm like, it's got to be that God controls technology. And then when you think of that, ooh, somebody just arrived in the room. Oh, the haters are here. The haters are here. Ooh, dark energy. Holy moly. The haters are here. So I was thinking about that and I'm thinking, we really don't understand the universe. We don't understand life itself. We're just beginning to understand. I guess you can say, like, when a baby opens their eyes and they're trying to focus, they can't speak, they can't really think, they don't know anything. That's where we're at when it comes to the universe. We're opening our eyes. We're opening our eyes. So I was just thinking about it. Wow, God shows them, the NDEers shows them their whole life on a screen. Just think about that. The screen appears
and they can see their whole lives. It's like if the atom is expanded and the atom is information in a sphere. It's just tripping me out. I'm thinking about it, it's just tripping me. And it records everything you've ever done, everything you've ever felt, everything you've ever thought. And then God, or the light, or whatever the supreme being is, the intelligence of the universe is, multiverse, waves his or her or whatever it does. Some people say it's a being, a person. Some people say it's a light. Waves the energy, and then the screen appears, or several screens appear with all things that you've ever experienced, and with everything that you've made others experience. So, as you're watching your life, some people say that they watch what their choices did in someone else's life, which is really trippy. So the only way I can understand it is like God God runs technology. I know it's very weird. So let's go ahead and continue on the journey of revealing the mind control devices that are destroying humanity at this time. So we left off at spyware. So what is important is the beginning of the mind hack is to identify the ports, i.e., the sensory input pathways. In a continuous bit stream of consciousness, how can one identify the auditory, the visual, the taste, the touch, and smell input port pathways in the brain? How do we identify that? There are several unique characteristics of the neural firing frequencies and phases for different parts of the brain that can be used roughly to identify sequences. But the easiest way to begin to identify the input pathways is a correlation from a known stimulus. It turns out that television is a perfect known stimulus for both the auditory and the visual information. Using a Van Eck hack on a person watching TV or a computer monitor that allows both a known visual field and an audio source to be correlation with the neuronal pathways and firing events. In addition, reading a book provides another way to add more data for word associations and internal vocalizations. In practice, this kind of known stimuli is not fully necessary. Hypothetically, if one had already mapped out millions of variations of minds, one could autocorrelate the information pathways to known models. Excuse me. A baby learns to see and make sense of the visual world despite there being or despite their missing a feedback mechanism to validate images and objects. So the organizing information should be obvious for our example. Hold on, guys. Hold on one second. I just turned on the AC. Hold on. So, for example, we will show how it can be done from scratch. Again, here are two mind hacking approaches. One is autocorrelate and build the cognitive decision model based on a known stimuli and proceed from there. This is a more methodical approach and might be done stealthier without the target human being aware it is happening. Two, grab any patterns and do a simulated search to grow all the known pathways. This is brute force hacking and would leave the target human acting bizarrely with all sorts of symptoms of mental illness while it was occurring. In practice, the human brain needs to be in a sort of hypnotized state. The two hemispheres become out of sync, and it is difficult to know if this is necessary to better differentiate the pathways or a side effect from hacking. The CIA's program initially was called the RHIC, which is the radio frequency hypnotic intracerebral control. A pulsing tinnitus is usually heard, and a flashing seen by hacked targets is what they see. This might be a way of controlling the spontaneous firing neurons that can be thought of as a cloaking mechanism for various mental tasks and a way of aligning the target mind pathways. However, remote hypnosis weapons may just have discovered that more control over the mental processes occurs when the brain's hemispheres aren't double checking their results. So if they're not double checking their results with each other and the misalignment is intentional but unnecessary for the mapping process of the brain. Once any part of the mind is mapped, a clone can occur or input sensors, and the sensor information can be transformed into traditional digital analogs for display. A famous demonstration of this was done in the 1990s using embedded probes into a cat's visual cortex. This was published in the Neuroscience magazine. The cat's visual field was displayed on a computer screen. The same was demonstrated many decades earlier for the audio cortex and the primitive encoding nerves from the cochlea. As the mapping process of the brain proceeds, words and meanings are further mapped from sounds and internal vocalizations. Now they get into stealing passwords, how these people can steal passwords remotely. Now they can do it with a computer, but the psychics can do it also. They can tune into your thoughts and they can, basically get your information from your thoughts while you're typing your password. Or they can look through your eyes as you're typing your passwords. So stealing passwords. Since encryption technology has become basically uncrackable by even the highest end supercomputers and is in the hands of every citizen, the most feasible way to gain access to computer networks is to grab the information at the source and the destination points while the information is still unencrypted. Oops, hold on, guys. So, password stealers work on many levels. There is a specialized hardware that can tap into the keyboards at the connection to the computer and record keystrokes. There is a software that hides on computers that records and reports passwords back to some location over the internet. There is a remote control and monitoring software, like a back orifice, which allows one to watch what is on another person's computer screen. Once a mind hacker connects to a target mind or a human being's mind, visual information is shared, so stealing a password through the visual cortex reconstruction is one possible way to get someone's passwords. This technique of grabbing the visual information from a person's mind is called screen scraping. Additionally, passwords are sounded out internally. So the psychics or the military, I guess you can remote viewer types. If you're, most of us when we're typing our passwords, we're saying it in our head. So they can pick up the thought waves and steal your passwords that way. Ooh, somebody's mad right now. Ooh, I got some mad folks. Unbelievable. So this technique of grabbing visual information is called screen scraping. Additionally, passwords are sounded out internally. The internal voice of the individual is mimicked out loud with a system called TAMI. The Stanford Research Institute, that's the remote viewing that the CIA was doing, SRI, first publicly demonstrated this capability of using brain patterns to have a computer speak the internally vocalized words of a human being back in the 1970s. It is difficult to keep secrets from yourself if you've been mind hacked. One way to protect your passwords is to use a random password generator that masks the password from view, such as any password. Only one password needs to be known to access the local database of passwords, which are copied to the authorization fields without the user seeing what it is. In order to grab the passwords, an agent would need to decipher or, yeah, decipher them. And it would probably require breaking and entering to achieve called black bag jobs. So the loggers. The keystroke loggers are considered a more dangerous type of malware. The intent of the software is clear cut. The software collects the keyboard information as it is typed by the user. There are hardware dongles that plug into the back of the computer where the keyboard connects that also collects keystroke information to be maliciously used later. The keystroke loggers use a hook into the handling of the keyboard information. The sample code is included in their teacher's edition of the CD. Windows and DOS systems utilize the hooking information differently, as one would expect, so as with most malware, it must be coded to be to the operating system specifically. What is the equivalent tactic used with mind hackers? It is far more evasive than most readers will be able to grasp without a demonstration. So, this part is the recording. The system records your entire life or the entire life of every human. I know a lot of people don't believe this, but we have these technologies that can record your life, which is scary. Sit with that. So, a cybernetic researcher in England developed an implantable microchip called the soul catcher. Its purpose is to record the electrical signals of the body for a person. And they do this for the entire lifetime of that person. This means that every thought and every heartbeat will be saved for eternity. Now, again, I talked about a few days ago the smart dust technology and how that records and sends signal and data back to the mainframe, whatever the mainframe is. And if let's just say that everything that's being sprayed into the air, besides it being having an application for weather modification, imagine that same whatever is being sprayed. Imagine if they're chips, because we have about 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 different programs. Imagine if those are, tiny miniaturized chips that we inhaled throughout the last maybe 2 decades. That would also send out information because that maps the entire environment, which was the intention of the creators of the smart dust. Their intention, when they did the documentary back in the 2000s, they talked about spraying the smart dust on everything in the woods, over the cities, over buildings. I don't know if they were spraying it in the oceans, but everywhere on land. And that information from those microchips that were smart dust would send out data back to the mainframe. And they even talked about that smart dust on the road would be able to send back information to the mainframe telling them that if there was a pothole or roads that needed to be fixed, these type of things. So the person's entire life will be recorded. This means that every thought, every heartbeat will be saved for eternity. Many civilian researchers don't know that a much larger wireless version is already operational. However, if the Neuralink programs are not just recording, A better name for the system would be the soul stealer or the soul catcher or the body snatcher, which is turning humans into robots. This is appropriately part of the military system called S.A.T.A.N. That's the acronym. And it's the silent, I'll look for the full name. Um, this is potentially millions of souls will be cataloged and saved. It's kind of like transcendence, right? They're talking about putting the consciousness of human beings into machines. So they love their religious metaphors in the Department of Defense. Side note, the article from the London Observer or The Guardian states Chris Winter of the British Telecom Artificial Life team predicted that within 3 decades, it would be possible to relive other people's lives by playing back their experiences on a computer. By combining this information with a record of the person's genes, your genetics, we could recreate a person physically. How do you do that? Cloning, stem cells. We're doing it now. We're growing ears, we're growing hearts and different organs, skin. So by doing it, we can do it physically. We can recreate the person emotionally, and we can recreate the person spiritually, is what they're stating. That's scary. It would be possible to imbue a newborn baby with a lifetime's experiences by giving him or her the quote unquote soul catcher chip of a dead person. So this is cloning basically, is what they're talking about. So they can create a clone with your genetics, with your experiences, they can provide memories, and on top of that, supposedly spirituality. That's trippy. And this is what the Dr. Winter said from the Telecom Artificial Life team. He said that this would be possible, or was taking Soul Catcher to 2025, meaning they think that this is going to be accomplished by 2025. Now, we've been told that immortality would be accomplished by 2040 or even earlier. So he says it would be possible to imbue a newborn baby with a lifetimes of experiences by giving him or her the soul catcher chip of a dead person. And then it continues, death has had its chips, say computer scientist. In earnest predictions of Ian Pearson, a cyberneticist, mathematician, and physicist, head of the futurology unit of the British Telecom, he states, if you draw the timelines realistically, this could be done by 2050. We would expect to be able to download your mind into a machine. If you're rich enough, then by 2050, it's feasible. Uh, Ray Kurzweil stated that it would be 2035 or 2040. It was what he said. If you're poor, you'll probably have to wait until 2075 or 2080 when it's routine. We are very serious about it. These people are serious about creating this transhumanism movement is serious about this stuff. This is why they're doing what they're doing with AI. It is possible to make a conscious computer with superhuman levels of intelligence before 2020. So they've accomplished this. Google did it, right? We have Chat GPT, all like GPT-1, GPT-2, GPT-4. Elon Musk is doing what is it? XAI. You have OpenAI, right? So they've accomplished it. So this book was right on point when they said this back in the 2000s, that they were going to have this done by the latest 2025. And so did the NASA circa 2025. I would definitely have emotions Immortality is within our grasp, said David Smith from the Observer UK News, the Guardian newspaper. And he said this in 2005. So these are the questions to ask. What is the bandwidth to record the lives of every human being currently alive? You can find the answer in the calculations. So is it 1.34 terabytes per second? Is it economically feasible with today's federal budget? How much would it currently cost to become silicon immortal? A rough calculation isn't available. One can imagine how brave a soldier could be if they knew they could be brought back to life with all their memories and personality intact. Their consciousness could be beamed into another human being or another human creating a remote control soldier. This is where all the remote mind control comes in. So the remote mind control experiments, this is where they're heading. Memory probing. Memory probing, this is one of the most important techniques in computer hacking. Passwords and solutions to text adventure games, for example, are stored in the RAM or on the hard disk. By scanning the RAM for ASCII words, many hackers were able to cheat on text-based adventure games or find passwords that were not encrypted. Interrogations of human memory are even easier since the search function is merely an association away. There is no firewall in the mind and no further encryption once a mind is hacked and mapped. One cannot easily separate the technology from the scripts in many of the uses and practices by the agencies. In particular, this is true with mind probing and interrogations. Infamous interrogation scripts include The Good Cop and the Bad Cop, The Wizard of Oz, Armageddon. And again, these scripts that I'm talking about, that the book is talking about, this is the same scripts that the Illuminati training bloodlines use in their training books when they're doing SRAs, Satanic Ritual Abuse and Training. These are the scripts they use. So the scripts are Good Cop, Bad Cop, Wizard of Oz, the Armageddon script, the Alice in Wonderland roles. The technologies do provide enormous insights and benefits for the users. Predictive models of sentences and responses are often demonstrated with a high accuracy rate. See the TAMI system in the next chapter for more detailed description of the military software system and its capabilities. Jolting the neural networks by adding a noise element can help trigger memories around a suggested focus. The bidirectional association memory probing, called BAM. The most important technique in memory probing is association. By replaying a particular smell, all sorts of memories can come flooding back. A smell is for some reason one of the most strongest memory association triggers. Flash a face or a place in the target's shared visual space, which creates several evoked potentials such as the B300 or the P300 if the target mind recognizes it. Related memories will be triggered for recording and analysis. For other interrogation processes, induction of the hypnotic state or the induction of the hypnotic state like is obtained with sodium pentothal that can be induced by pure brain entrainment patterns, and the target doesn't care what they say or think. For example, with electromagnetic mind probing, induction of the emotion of guilt and shame can be played in a loop and will often help with the interrogations and finding what memories the target may have that are associated with the feeling of guilt. This is one reason why the agencies look for sociopathic personalities so that they are immune to this type of mind probing tactic. The cloak and dagger games have become incredibly complex. So this makes sense. That's why we have crazy, psychopathic political leaders and people in Hollywood and people in finance. Pretty much all of them are psychopathic. Another approach used by mind crackers is a precognitive response to the recognition or the recognition of places, faces, events, and names. This can be done by EEG or functional MRI. By showing the subject names or faces, a recognition signal is given by the brain without the subject having to be asked any questions. With more sophisticated remote EEG cloning technologies, the subject's newly adapted extra senses can be shown a combination of sequence until recognition events occur. The brain of the subject will often automatically fill in the remainder of the data of interest through subconscious association. So, for example, if the subject memorizes a combination lock, the information extraction specialist, which is the psychic driver, would present a sequence of numbers to the mind, and it would present it to the mind of the subject, which would be perceived as a visual. When the first two-digit number was recognized, it is locked in, and he or she proceeds with the second number. So once they ask you for the first number and you get that number and it's locked in the mind of the person will automatically give you the remainder. In a bidirectional associative memory, sometimes the remaining digits will subconsciously be filled in and perceived by the cloner as a visual or auditory. The mind cracking technique also works with faces and names. The target human the target human mind of interest will alter a generic face in the shared visual workspace into the one of interest. Extracting floor layouts of secret bases, for example, can be done as well using this technique. Now they have something called the self-destruct algorithms. We know about them algorithms that are hurting our children, right? They complain about TikTok hurting our children, but what about all the other platforms and YouTube and, you know, the media with their repeat, 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 colors, colors, repeat, trigger words, repeat, repeat, algorithms. They don't talk about that. They only talk about TikTok. So, side note, this is an interview that they had with government, with people that are in government projects. So, an interview with one of the 650 identified government projects. This is what they're stating. We can make anyone a drug addict. This is so fucked up. We can make anyone a drug addict, living homeless and under a bridge. What do you think we will do with you? They said to me before the mine erasure process. This is a survivor. The Department of Defense, the DoD, calls these tactics a self manipulation and thereby hopes to get around the laws of murder so they can murder you again with Satan and Christ. They can murder you. Um, so they get around the laws of murder through indirection and psychological manipulation of the target to commit suicide. So they can get you to commit suicide, like with the voice to skull, the voice of God technology, Tammy. Well, Tammy is that keeps records of you. Satan, and then Christ, and then you have the RHIC, and then you have another one. I forgot what the other one was. We'll read it now. There are some real damaging malicious payloads that took very reckless minds with which to come up. Disk drives can be thrashed, CPUs can be overheated, other chips can be erased, monitors set to direct their electron gun outside of the viewable screen, furthering the deterioration. And then not to mention the disk drives that can be purged. These are some of the worst possible scenarios. And of course, self-destruct payloads have their analogs from with computer and human viruses and malicious programs. Many computers control robots. They control missile defenses. They control power grids. and building environment controls. One might imagine how much damage could be wreaked if one of these systems were hacked. Dams could be made to flood or downriver the city. But in the focus of the mind hacking or the mind human hacking, using a computer science framework of analysis, the idea is to destroy the person, to destroy the economy, to destroy the culture by implanting ideas in their collective consciousness, either via television or directly to the brain, direct neural entrainment. America's biggest export is its culture. Now they're talking about suicide bombers, psycho bombs, which really relates, it's about the psycho bombs are really about mass shooters. And then you got staged indirections. So traditionally, the CIA killed people by staged car crashes or by throwing them off buildings or by staged suicides or by the heart attack or heart failure. And remember, in the 1970s, we had a congressional hearing where they talked about the CIA's heart attack gun, where it's a gun that throws a dart and it causes a person to have a heart attack. And there wouldn't be any evidence. So they stage suicides, heart failure, but indirection to avoid these well-known patterns has become their favorite. So indirection is the new way of doing this. Targets, individuals, are set up to be disposed of by local authorities. Many people try to create publicity stunts to get national attention and to get justice for those individuals that are target of the agencies and that were part of the torture, brainwashing, or child murders by the government through litigation, suing, or journalism. But as one CIA agent stated, he states, it simply won't see the light of day. Even worse, we can lock them up in psychological wards, and their words and writings, if articulated, could be hushed and censored. Every government uses this technique to quell the truth and cloud the patterns of abuse and usurpations of power. The internet and the alternative media has provided another outlet for people to find relevant and important information outside of the propaganda mainstream media. This is more of a threat to the forces of censorship than books or newspapers. Suicide bombers are a type of programmed assassin. It is a popular method amongst poorer countries who don't have missiles or grenades and remote drone airplanes. Like the kamikazes, they use traditional forms of persuasion and coercion to convince their people that they are doing it for the greater good. Excessive patriotism or religious zealots are the usual are usually psychologically excuse me are usual psychological drivers and control mechanisms. But China, Russia, and the US and North Korea have developed some very powerful hypnosis, which is based on torture and splitting personalities of an individual to create what we call the Manchurian candidates. The game has gone even further now that it can all be done remotely, wirelessly, anywhere in the world. The CIA experiments on behalf of the DoD, Department of Defense, in the field of this research has landed them in the hot seat several times in history. Before President Ronald Reagan, mind manipulation subjects were locked up in mental hospitals where the experimentation could be done out of the public view and out of their sight. He signed a bill that shuts down many of these hospitals, and most likely in retaliation, a psycho quote unquote bomb or programmed assassin named John Hinckley was sent to shoot Reagan. Of course, the public is only allowed to believe it believe it is just a random person who went nuts and on a killing spree. This technology is still supposed to be kept secret from the average person. The people chosen for the MK Ultra and artichoke experiments, according to the documents, are usually well-educated people, roughly 35 years of age, and easily fit into the social groups. Coincidentally, mental illness has an onset of exactly 35 years of age. Once the programmed assassin makes an attempt, they will be disposed of by local authorities, according to the documents released from the Freedom of Information Act. Aggression signals, torture, psychopathy, and terrorist brainprint personality profiles are the general mix that create the desired violent individual or group of people that are directed with a little cognitive mapping and mental trickery coaxing. Now they get into the suicide through torture and depression signals. So they're pulsing into the mind of the person to kill themselves, to kill themselves. We've heard these stories where people say that one day out of nowhere they started hearing voices that weren't their own, and it was all these negative voices, and it was constant 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So this book will refrain from commenting on the obvious moral implications and the shameful and disgraceful and dishonorable conclusions people would come to if it were fully known how often these techniques were tested on random citizens. It's crazy, bro. And they did this to improve the technology and the scripts. They wanted to see the kill effectiveness, and so and to illegally murder large numbers of people in the last 40 years. But our researchers conclude that the depression and suicidal subliminal messages were the first killing techniques at the beginning of this top of the secret research. Suicide, whether staged or intentionally induced by the technology, is the most plausible, deniable way that the intelligence community does its cleanup. So they drive you basically insane. With just the psychological techniques of the microwave hearing auditory effect, they can take the target to their death. But according to Jim Keith, a researcher who is now dead, they can use 6.6 hertz brain entrainment to create depression and despair in targets, increasing their effectiveness. Interesting, 66, huh? 6.6 hertz. Now they get into the amplification of the destructive behaviors and making people addicted, or creating addiction pathways. So speeding in a car, creating alcoholism, and heavy smoking are the most common types of signals that can be amplified due to the plausible denial and unnoticeable statistical patterns. But many other patterns of induced risky behavior are in the manuals of the CIA. Very few have the expertise or necessary equipment to do this kind of testing. Again, for obvious reasons, lack of financial resources or access before death penalty was executed on them, shutting down and stressing the subsystems. Many computer programmers are not stress tested. Quality assurance software divisions load test applications. They load networks and databases against normal user loads and some extreme conditions. Trying to crash the program is the objective. But crashing a computer doesn't necessarily kill people except under warfare conditions. Redundant systems for failover are the usual method to handle unexpected conditions. Catastrophic failover can be compared to a shadow government taking over. If a government is taken out by a weapon of mass destruction, for example, in corporate system, the catastrophic failover data centers are located far away from active ones. Malicious software can wear down the disk drive by thrashing it over and exercising the mechanical parts. Other techniques involve overclocking the CPU, which overheats it and destroys the chip. Our focus is on the individual mind, but obviously scaling the model to governments and other organizations. There are many ways to destroy the human body, and there are many ways to destroy the mind through these kinds of extreme stresses. Using neurological weapons, the brain can be damaged through high constant cortisol levels and neurotoxicity of overexcitement. This is true. This is again why they love sleep deprivation and constant attacks, energetic attacks to keep you from sleeping. This leads to neurotic, paranoid schizophrenia symptoms. And similarly, the heart is damaged through increased secretions of adrenaline over long durations of time. The heart can also be entrained to dysfunctional beating patterns. The Russians wrote about this psychic warfare technique in 1970s, which was published widely, where a runaway adrenaline or adrenal process can be started in the brain, basically killing the target by a remote control heart attack, and can extend the panic attacks and spooking them. They call it spooking them to death. And this is why they use gang stalking. So physical health can be stress tested. Trying to overstress the system to cause damage is the objective, and this is the technique. Damaging the quote unquote plumbing of the cardiovascular system and overstressing it is a popular method of silent kills using neurological communication weapons. That would be the voice to God technology. They like to cause heart failure, blood clots, and strokes. So, Moscow's remote controlled heart attacks. Side note. The researchers of this book studied the effects of over 650 people in the United States that were being experimented on against their consent and their will. They were experimented on against their consent for human effects and efficacies of these weapons. One of the common experiments conducted on these subjects is perfecting remote heart attacks, perfecting arrhythmias, and other cardiovascular disease, which causes prolonged stress. It causes depression and repatterning the heart beating chambers over time. So they stress you, they stress you, they stress you. I know that this is real because it happened to me since 2016, 2017. So I know what I've gone through, and this is correct, what they're talking about here. So they stress you, they stress you. Sleep deprivation, mine's lasted, what is it, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. So my sleep deprivation, meaning I was only getting about 4 hours of sleep per day, maybe per night, 6 years. I was being sleep deprived for 6 years. And, they would send attacks after attacks because, again, they go 24 hours a day. They have someone monitoring you and then attacking you. It's the psychic warfare soldiers that I was talking about, which is what they talk about in the book. They're constantly attacking, attacking, attacking. And then they do the gang stalking to stress you whenever you're awake. And then, of course, online, they bully you. They have people like commenting and making certain, you guys saw me back in the day when I used to, call them out in my comment section because I knew who they were. You can sense these people. Their energy is really nasty. So, they bully you online when you're online. They sometimes even call, like they have access to your phone, your address, all your information. They gang stalk you, and then they spiritually stalk you, or they energetically stalk you. They stress you, stress you, stress you, stress you. Sorry, stress you. They make you sick. I can say that happened to me for a long time. I was getting really sick. I gained like 30 pounds because of it. I couldn't sleep. I was always with migraines. And that's because I didn't know how to fight back. I didn't know how to fight them back in a way where I released the energy that they were sending. But I learned how to do that. It took me a while, actually. It took me quite a few years to learn how to bounce that stuff back. And then praying helped a lot, get these people to receive some of their own medicine. So this is true what they're saying in this side note. Okay, so one of the common experiments conducted on the subjects is remote heart attacks, arrhythmias, and radiovascular disease. They prolong it to cause stress, cause depression, and repatterning of the heart chambers over time, and this deteriorates the body. Determining time until failure, which is called TUF, is an important metric in these weapon systems. So they want to make sure your body deteriorates so you die from what would look like a heart attack, natural causes, or something with the body, cancer. All of these variables lead to congestive heart failure and many other kinds of silent plausible deaths. Unfortunately, the more plausible and silent the death amounts to the slowest torture to death. This is known to humans so far. Particular sociopaths in the Pentagon and the CIA ordered the perfection of these weapons on the world's population, including their own country. They hide amongst the good Americans and taint the reputation. Okay, so this is the second of David Hambline's two-part series on plasma and electronic weapons. The brain has always been a battlefield. New weapons might be able to hack directly into the nervous system of a human. They have something called controlled effects, and controlled effects is one of the Air Force's ambitious long-term challenges. It starts with a better and a more accurate bombs, but moves on to discuss devices that quote unquote make selected adversaries think or act according to their needs. By studying and modeling the human brain and the nervous system, the ability to mentally influence and confuse personnel is also possible. The American military may want to attack the nervous system of a person with pain rays and laser plasma pulses. But they are not the only ones. The Russians have long studied such systems too, including one weapon that could, in theory, remotely trigger heart attacks. In 2003, the Second European Symposium on Non-Lethal Weapons, Anatoly Korolev and his colleagues from Moscow State University presented a paper with a snappy title called Bioelectrodynamic Criterion of the Non-Lethal Weapon Effectiveness Estimation and the Interaction Mechanisms of the Multi-Layer Skin Tissues with the Electromagnetic Radiation. This is a study of how radio frequency weapons, like the American active denial system, can affect the skin. After wading through a mass of technical data showing how complex interactions are reached to the punchline, they state the sensations modality, which is prickling, touch, pressure, goose flesh touch, burning pain, depends on the field parameters and the individual concrete being factors. As a matter of fact, we can really choose the non-lethal bioeffect. The effects include sensations similar to those discussed previously and more besides. The paper discusses the effects on cell membranes and affecting the body's normal function, which includes information transferred to the organs of control. At the same conference, V. McCucken of the TriMas Engineering Center stated electronic equipment for complex influence on biological objects. So the biological objects, he means you and me. His laboratory apparatus uses a modulated beam of radio waves to produce what he terms, quote unquote, disorder of the anatomic or the autonomic nervous system, which put forward as a possible non-lethal weapon. He notes that there is no general agreement on how electromagnetic waves disrupt nerves. He mentions the ion channels, which are similar to those in the plasma paper, but he certainly seems to be seeing the same effects on American researchers. But it need not to be non lethal. He states also that the effects of quote unquote change of electrocardiogram and what he calls function break of heart muscle, the vulnerability of the heart to electrical stimulation, including that is produced by electromagnetic waves, is well documented. A lethal device would interfere with the electrical potentials that keep the chambers of the heart synchronized, producing fibrillations and rapid death. A death ray doesn't need to be a truck sized laser that reduces the target to smoke heap. A small device that stops the heart will do the job. Little has been openly published in this area in the public domain, but this may be the tip of the iceberg. We are likely to be hearing more in the future, especially if the Russians manage to find funding. I don't think we need a tinfoil hat yet, but a layer of conducting mesh built into body or body armor might save a lot of heartache in the years to come. The secondary tertiary diseases, which is caused by prolonged stress. Disease induction, such as diabetes, such as cardiovascular, and cancer, can all be triggered by the cell signaling mechanisms controlled by electromagnetics. The angiochrome damage or the adrenal burnout leaves the target or the individual lethargic. It leaves them sluggish and schizophrenic. These are similar systems that many were described as, as being tortured in Guantanamo Bay, the Navy base. Then they have something called cell signaling. Cell signaling is part of the complex system of communication that governs basic cellular activities and coordinates cell actions. The ability of the cells to perceive and correctly respond to their microenvironment is the basis of the development, the tissue repair, and the immunity, as well as a normal tissue homeostasis. Errors in the cellular information processing are responsible for the diseases such as cancer, autoimmunity, and diabetes. In the cardiovascular muscle, the gap junctions between adjacent cells allows for action potential propagation from the cardiac pacemaker region of the heart to spread and coordinately cause contraction of the heart. Many cell signals are carried by the molecules that are released by one cell, and they move to make contact with another cell. The endocrine signals are called hormones. Hormones are produced by endocrine cells, and they travel through the blood to reach all parts of the body. Specifically of signaling, or the, excuse me, the specificity of the signaling can be controlled if only some cells can respond to a particular hormone. The paracrine signals target only cells in the vicinity of the emitting cell. Neurotransmitters represent an example. Some signaling molecules can function as both. They function as a hormone or a neurotransmitter. For example, the epinephrine, I'm probably saying this wrong, the epinephrine and the norepinephrine can function as hormones when released from the adrenal gland and are transported to the heart by way of the bloodstream. This can also be produced by neurons to function as a neurotransmitter within the brain. This description of cell signaling mechanisms helps understand how diabetes can be induced. It's fucking crazy. How diabetes can be induced, and the remote heart attack weapon works by both stimulating the adrenal gland through neural entrainments while simultaneously simulating contraction of the blood vessels and irregular heart activity. Simulating neurotoxicity is part of the set of the signals used to menticide. Many diseases can be induced with just complex modulated radio waves. I will repeat that again. Many diseases can be induced with just complex modulated radio waves. Radio waves. Cancer induction takes longer to kill the targets, but it's useful for quote unquote silent genocides of populations. So this is cell signaling. Do the research on cell signaling. The CIA has developed many sub-race dependent viruses for such uses. So the ELF pulsed magnetic fields modulate opioid peptide gene expression in myocardial cells. Let's see. The possible influence of electromagnetic fields on gene transcription and translation is currently under study and is being debated. In particular, Gray provided evidence that the endogenous opioid systems can be affected by electromagnetic fields. We have previously shown that the myocardial, I'll just say cardial, cells express both the prodenorphin gene and the dynorphin B, which is a biologically active end product which acts as a selective K-opioid receptor. In addition, the simulation or the stimulation of the cardiac K-opioid receptors has been found to play a crucial role in the regulation of the cytosolic Ca2. The homeostasis and cell contractility. The present work aims at investigating whether the dynorphinergic system may be affected by the pulsed magnetic fields that are called the PMF. This type is previously proved to be effective in promoting bone repair and modulating the immune cell functions. Adult ventricular cardiac myocytes were enzymatically disassociated from the hearts of 2 to 3 month old rats. The myocytes were then exposed to 50 hertz of PMF with peak intensity of 1.4 MT, which generated by a pair of Helmholtz coils connected to the pulse generator. The opioid peptide gene expression was investigated by assessing the levels of the mRNA by the aid of a sensitive solution hybridization RNAse protection assay. The exposure of the myocardial cells to be PMF for 4 induced a 4 times increase in the protenorphin mRNA, and there's like a bunch of other stuff. And then let's see where, hold on. And then and then they talk about the mRNA and nRNA. The spooking to death. So inducing prolonged and intense stress to a target can cause heart failure and strokes. The techniques range from a runaway adrenal process to inducing heart arrhythmias and vascular contractions to raise blood pressure. So they can raise your blood pressure to unsafe levels in order to find a defect and the weakness. Even during the free torture Bush eras, torture doctrines required a physician present. When purposeful torturing one to death, the rule of law was, it didn't apply. Unfortunately, the federal rule of law is simply don't get caught. Deny everything, and dead men don't talk. So killing someone with just information, cellular communication, and or neurological weapons can be more difficult than one might suspect. It can take a long time in many cases, but the combined probabilities of the thousands of different techniques add up. This is why they are spending so much money and human resources on perfecting this weapon. As an interesting side note, many of the behavioral modification to death techniques can be defeated by their faith in religion. However, religion can be used against a target by using the voice to God technology and the omnipotent techniques. It can't stop the torture, but it can stop the quick kills and use of the human as an assassin for political or military purposes. Unfortunately, Muslim jihadists are easily used by these techniques while Christians have some defenses unless they are extremist. And then they give you a diagram of how this works with the sensor. So they have a potential stressor, the external environment, and the internal milieu. Then they have the intention, evaluation, and the memory, the processes. They target the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampal formation, the adrenals, and then the cortisol excretions. So spooking also involves many psychological techniques such as stalking and tampering with your computer. The CIA has been improving their creative ways to scare, to control, and to torture. And physical renditions using barking, growling dogs or sexual humiliation and playing on every fear such as suffocation or threats against family are traditionally used by the United States government. If one studies crime families, one can understand how the CIA and some other federal agencies and financial institutions act as a self protection racket to hide their crimes. In remote renditions, different methods are employed: threats to torture, threats to kill. The person and their family are still used, but they have to be creative since the physical threats must be implied. The interesting computer virus developed by the CIA, DoD, and NSA can be inserted by the communication warfare unit by using, I won't say the wireless, whatever, wireless protocol. To any vulnerable computer, the world is using satellites. So if a vulnerable computer in the world is using satellites and HARP, you guys don't know what HARP is, you should already know. HARP, like Global Communication System. Specialized viruses cannot be easily found by the average person. So using virus checking software is no good. Virus checking software only looks for the most common. So the most common viruses and those that spread maliciously that are reported. The CIA quote unquote viruses are not meant to spread from computer to computer and only attack the targeted machine, which which then purges themselves usually so that they leave no trace behind. So they can go into your computer, do what they do. I believe WikiLeaks exposed this as well with Vault 7 and Marble and all these other leaks that they have, where they can go into your computer, they can plant things, they can, they can say that, you're doing something somewhere, and then they can leave your computer without leaving a trace. Oh, yeah, stay mad, buddy. Stay mad. They are meant to be psycho-interactive and spread from the computer through the visual or audio ports of the human into the psychology, and possibly thereby have the person spread the fear to other humans. So if you're afraid that they're looking into your computer, don't be afraid. Just record everything. Make sure you record where you are at all times. Your searches. I'm always online, so I'm always posting. So pretty much, I have a timeline. So If you have any problems, just record everything that you're doing. So these techniques are still classified in the general category of mind viruses and psychotronic viruses, despite the way that the terror and the fear is introduced to the culture. So psychoterrorism is what it's called. An example of one such specialized malware spooking is captured by the government whistleblower. Sorry. So, an example of such specialized malware spooking virus was captured by a government whistleblower. Graphic cards have their own processors and can run instruction sets. Many hackers have figured out that they could insert their own code to run in the graphics processors and not be detected by standard virus checkers. The semi famous satanic spooking virus is used effectively to scare the hell out of the target. It only works if the conditions are right. Its mode of attack is into the target. The idea is to make the target see an image of him or herself as if they are possessed by a demon. This is accomplished by altering the aperture, exposure, and contrast parameters. By creating an overexposure in digital cameras, movements showing teeth and eyes that come out and are very spooky, like an alien lizard's eyes. The eyes look like a slit or slits due to the bleeding of the white into the dark space, and the teeth become sharp and pointed. See a screen snapshot below of this technique. In addition to scary images of the target, the overexposed background turns white. Using face identification algorithms, the target's rough image is put into the foreground while mixing in horrific images of people getting their heads cut off or something similarly horrific in the background. Since this uses a significant amount of computing power in real time, the frame rate tends to be fairly slow, around 7 frames per second. There is a variation on this spooking virus where the virus will find pictures most recently viewed on the target's hard drive and use face identification, then alter the picture with a demonic red eye that are quite subtle. Face identification is imperfect, so the techniques doesn't always work. Okay, another computer virus that is meant to drive the target crazy and decrease productivity by up to 20% is using small nuances like switching keystrokes on their computer every so often and making them believe their computer is breaking down. This virus is also classified under economic warfare. Oh my God. Okay, so now they're asking questions, or yeah, the discussion. Knowing some of the techniques of stress induction and torture used by the CIA, come up with a list of 20 human fears and stresses. Then think of creative ways of how to realize them in remote renditions, knowing the power of this technology. So, disrupting the human networks. So, this is where they isolate you and they try to like get your family against you, your friends against you, and make you look crazy in front of them. So, one of the reasons to spook a target individual is to find out what their family and friendship networks look like. People run for help to people they trust. This might be useful in routing or rooting out a terrorist network, for example. As for government control, it is useful to disrupt the groups and movements from organizing and forming or protesting. The Department of Defense had several contracts approved for what it's called lifelong studies of relationships. How could the DoD study the formation of relationships without spying on American citizens? Creating a network connections through coincidences by design is an important way to order society. The tricks to disrupt relationships can be physical, legal, and emotional. Even in the canonical Bible text, this technique is spoken of. God commanded Gabriel to trick the people into fighting amongst themselves. Gabriel was to go to the biters, to the reprobates, to the children of the fornicated or the fornication, to the offspring of the watchers. From among men, bring them forth and excite them against one another. Let them perish under mutual slaughter, for length of days shall not be theirs. Enoch 10:13. And so Gabriel instigated wars among the giants, the children of the watchers, I guess the Nephilim. In the Quran, it is mentioned under trickery, where Satan makes those on the same side fight against each other. And that's volume 4, book 54, number 510, narrated Aisha. On the day of the battle, the Uhud, when the pagans were defeated, Satan shouted, "O slaves of Allah, beware of the forces at your back." And on that, the Muslims of the front files fought with the Muslims of the back files, thinking they were pagans. The uh, Hadifa looked back to see his father Al-Yaman being attacked by the Muslims. He shouted, "O Allah's slaves, my father, by Allah." They did not stop till they killed him. May Allah forgive you. So, i.e., the father till he met Allah, i.e., died. Divide and conquer is the strategies, or the strategy. The strategies have been used by the United States in the Middle East. This helped disrupt the oil monopolies. In Afghanistan, where the Cold War was fought, the United States used Iraq to fight against Iran, who the Soviet Union was backing. The Soviet Union also has interests in not allowing a union to form in the Middle East. Side note, the researchers of the book studied 30 groups that have formed around the topic of mind control torture, electronic harassment, and government surveillance. The majority of the groups disbands and shrinks over time. This was because of the members. Studying how they tried to organize shows a very big weakness. First, they have a severe lack of resources. Secondly, they were very vulnerable to paranoia of agent provocateurs, which are those trying to disrupt the group. However, this petty bickering is what actually led to their inability to organize and unify in one loud voice. Now we're getting into the CIA using racial hatred experiments. Whoa, I think we're experiencing that in the last, 7 years? Racial hatred experiments. Critical race theory, anyone? So over 75 mind control experiments have been identified from 650 interviews of American CIA human behavior modification experiments in the last 4 years. One of particular interest is creating and inciting racial hatred. Approximately 44% of those interviewed were quote unquote conditioned and brainwashed into hating a particular religion, hating a particular race, and sex during their years of being experimented on. This is true. So I can tell you from the spiritual aspect of things that there are many of the people that are in the intelligence community are racist, actually. They have a very, in the high ranking, they have a very like Nazi ideology. They're very racial. So 44% of them were conditioned to be racist, or they attempted to brainwash them into being, xenophobes, racist, or even sexist. In war theory, this is necessary to incite wars between groups. While pursuing a world domination strategy, it is important to weaken the countries and the groups that one desires to dominate. Unity creates strength. Dividing and conquering is the oldest warfare strategy in recorded texts, not only dividing groups who are forming, but inciting them to attack and distrust others. This is an important step to create a preoccupation, rational using a irrational using a pre war context of attrition. In simpler terms, this means that behind the scenes, using various techniques like the CIA, the KGB, and the Nazi psychologists developed, you try to get groups to fight each other in order to reduce their numbers, their will to fight another war, and exhaust their resources before you come in and police in as the police force to take over. The techniques to create racial hatred are they're similar to all others. It is conditioned response using a combination of subliminal messaging, subliminal suggestion, and quote unquote pain signals. The biases leading to irrational hatred are usually learned through culture, and it's learned through parents, but it can be speeded up using these methods that were mentioned. Correlations between torture and pain signals and the presence of the characteristic despise to create despises all that is necessary. The brain will naturally draw the conclusion that quote unquote color, sex, religion is somehow related to the pain and the stress that and their demise. The subliminal messages using complex technologies beyond the scope of this article also speed up the xenophobia, the racism, and the sexism. Naturally, propaganda and psychological warfare methods, information warfare methods, and media manipulations are important tools in doing this. So, this is being done to any large group. Having control of both mind control technology, having control of the media, and having control over the propaganda plant groups is how the CIA has been able to overthrow governments to put in a new one that's controlled by the US. And they do this behind the scenes. Side note, here's another survivor. Interview with an American Manchurian candidate. Question: do you believe any particular group is behind your torture? Answer: I was never bigoted in my life, but during the programming, they were able to systematically program me to hate Chinese. Then they systematically programmed me to hate Russians, and then the English, and then the Americans. Obviously, this is useful to incite wars over populations and to turn a spy into a double agent. Similar techniques were used to try to program me to kill particular American generals and admirals that I knew nothing about. They finally gave up trying to program. They finally gave up the programming after President Obama took office. It appears as if they were trying to create domestic terrorists to help their case for more war and take away more rights and liberties. You asked me, do I believe any group is behind my torture? Now, I of course know that the CIA has been doing this behavior modification and brainwashing washing research on people all over the world since their formation. The only world superpower won't talk about it nor stop it. This is it. The greatest weapon of mass destruction of human beings and their will and their minds that has ever been conceived. This is the biggest secret. So do these techniques violate the right to assemble? America has a long history of keeping people silent. Remember civil rights and the Vietnam protest? How do you go about forming a protest? What restrictions are there? Who decides where and when it can take place? What kind of non lethal weapons can be used to disassemble the group? Do new laws need to be passed, or are informed based clever subversion and offensive information operations legal? So now they're getting into counter espionage and countermeasure. So tripwires and detection algorithms. Computer scientists borrowed this concept from military culture. Tripwires connected to grenades were used to secure an area from animal or human attacks. In computer security, this is a means to alert the operating system or operating systems personnel that a cyberspace attack has occurred. They use hashing techniques to identify the changing of the operating system files. A hash is a unique number using encryption, like techniques based on an algorithm to produce a nearly unique identifier for any set of computer information, which is executables or data. Substitution of modified operating system files is called the rootkit. Shadow and puppet governments are analogs to rootkits, but most quote unquote rootkits disable the antivirus software and tripwire detection methods. It is like cultural warfare, where the people elected and put in charge disable the intelligentsia who might warn the general public that their own country was overthrown. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the international laws should serve as a warning to a populace of a country that it has been overthrown from the inside if they aren't obeyed. So see the torture doctrines of the US and the enemy within. In the cybernetic world, there are several possible tripwires that could be used. Later, the reader will learn about the system called Christ, and that means the Common Human Routines Inference Software Technology. How can one detect that a mind hack has occurred in an individual? Generally, this isn't a subtle process, and the targeted individual will have memories of the events. An observer would notice a change of personality. The brain prints would be altered, and traditionally the EEG and the MRI and the PET imaging would show the differences if they had a before and after. Hypothetically, if the Russians and the US were in a secret psychotronic war, which we are, if you didn't know, we're in an environmental war, weather modification, and a psychotronic war. And then on top of that, we have enemies within. So, hypothetically, if the Russians and the US were in a secret psychotronic war, specific brain pattern echoes would be detected. The Van Eck hacking and Tempest standards. The electromagnetic permissible emission standard. There is a freeware available from this source to perform a Van Eck hack of a computer monitor using directional antenna. There is a software to scramble such a hack from here. The game gets more sophisticated with the NSA technology. The Van Eck hacking allows one to reconstruct images from the information energy that seeps out from the computer screens. Emanations. Signet. Emanations. That's crazy, bro. I was talking about this. People said it's a conspiracy theory. They can get information off your screen, the pulsing of your screen. Unbelievable. So the information energy that seeps out of the computer screens, computer speakers, and keyboards at great distances. Tempest is a standard that secret labs must ensure they maintain in order to reduce the risk of the Van Eck hack. Similarly, the synaptic amplification levels determine the risk of being mind hacked. Fewer the neurotransmitter on a neuron, often more neurotransmitters that is left in the synaptic junction. The SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, work because they increase the signals of the neurons that use the neurotransmitter. Serotonin and genetics plays a role in determining synaptic amplification levels too. By revisiting the model of the neuron, it becomes apparent why the bioamplification occurs, and it occurs at the lower power levels of influence, with increased signal transmission between neurons. A neuron can be viewed as a nonlinear amplifier with a comparator at a threshold. And then they give you a diagram, And then they talk about depolarization, threshold voltage, normal, amplified, typical S curve brain signal amplification. And then the conclusion is that those brains with most activity are the best targets for psychic warfare. Their brain signals can be modulated the easiest by electronic or electromagnetic influences. Research for the PSI gene by the Science and Technology Division for a drug to induce this state is the most probable. Synaptic junctions with excess neurotransmitters cause the base voltage of the cell to be further up the amplification curve. In order for the biocommunication weapons to hack the human mind at a low power level that is nearly undetectable by others, the average synaptic amplification factor should be high. The quote unquote head echo effect of radar imaging from the giant phased array fields is the coded term for a neural response from a pulsed ion cyclotron resonance, and this is a heating signal to see if there is an open port to further hack the mind. This is called pinging. So it's just like how the Stingray, if you guys have ever heard of the Stingray technology, it pings your phone every time you pass by every few blocks. Here in Florida, the setup every few blocks. So it pings your phone every time you pass by a unit. So let me repeat this again. It's very long-winded though. The coded term for a neural response from a pulsed ion cyclotron resonance heating signal to see if there is an open port to further hack the mind. This is called pinging or port scanning in the computer hacking world. From that signal response, a bootstrapping method of further connecting the neural click streams and responses completes the cognitive model and the hack. This assumes that the mind was not already in the vast database of quote unquote personality profiles, as the CIA calls it. So, in a way, there is an equivalent Tempest standard for the mind, which is for the mind Van Heck hacking risk of population. Then you have something called the network analyzers and packet sniffers. So let me see what time. Okay, so I'm going to leave it here, but tomorrow we'll get into the network analyzers and packet sniffers. We'll get into the echelon for the mind, which is the Chatter, the Tammy, the Alice programs. Then we'll get into the cybernetic systems, antivirus software. And then they talk a little bit about the JFK conspiracy, total information awareness. The mind not having firewalls like you have a computer, like your computer has firewalls. And then they talk about they're going to get into the cybernetic hive mind, where everybody is basically thinking the same. All right, let me see. Wait. Okay, so this is page. Okay. All right, guys. If you want to support, make sure you like, subscribe, share, hit all notification for future live streams and videos. If you want to support monetarily, you can go ahead in the links in the description. Let's see here. That would be PayPal, Cash App, Patreon, Bitcoin. Let me see how many more pages this is. This is what? Dude, I can't believe that this guy was working on, or these people, these scientists, these insiders and researchers were working on this in the 80s. And then they were talking about it in the 90s and then went ahead and gathered everything and put it in a book in the 2000s. And everything they've mentioned, most of it has come to light. we are now aware of these technologies, meaning it's officially public, and all of it was considered a conspiracy theory for the last 40 years. And it's crazy. We would have never known if the survivors didn't expose the MK Ultra program. We would have never known about Artichoke. We would have never known about Project Naomi. We would have never known about Monarch. We would have never known about like the voice to skull, which is now like Medusa, and like the variations of all these, you know, these acoustic auditory, microwave auditory effects technology. Would have never known. Would have never known. It's crazy. All right, so let me go back here. All right, guys. Oh, and there's some other stuff. Let me go ahead and let me give you a nugget for those of you that stayed on. Let me give you a nugget. Head on over to my X account. The link is in the description. And check out, I mean, we know this is real. I've done the stories over the last 9 years, 8 years. The weather modification programs, projects. Go to the NOAA website. Well, look at the video. Then go to the NOAA website. You're going to see the information on a previous tweet or post. Go to the website and then look to see how many weather modification programs have been reported for at NOAA, because now it's law, right? They've been reporting whenever somebody, a state, a county, well, not really a state or county, but whatever organizations, when they're ready to do a weather modification experiment or whatever they do, they're now reporting some of them on the NOAA website. So geoengineering, weather modification, solar radiation management. There's like 20 million other names, heat, something another, space. I mean, there's one that's for space weather, all this craziness. But now it's official. It's no longer a conspiracy theory. And then look at the video that I posted. It's a combination of these weird anomalies in the radar systems during really bad storms. So Ronald Reagan announced a program that is AKA Star Wars program, or the, what is it? I forgot the original name, but the Star Wars program. And that was in the 1980s, folks. It's 2024, almost 2025. What do you think we're doing? And then not even going all the way back to Tesla with his death rays. That's over 100 years ago, almost 100 years ago. What do you think we're doing now? I mean, Tesla created wireless technology. Tesla. Nikola, not the car maker. Nikola Tesla. 100 years ago. 100. Just think about that. We're living in dangerous times. And all I'm going to say is don't take anything in your body, okay? All right. See you later. Bye. Adios, amigos.